Story 1. My phone number used to belong to David Copperfield, so I receive calls and messages for him frequently. One time, I spoke on the phone with Paul McCartney because of it. Story 2. One time, I saw a cat use the crosswalk at an intersection. It waited for the light to change before walking across the street in the other direction. Crazy. Story 3. My mom legally changed my name when I was 5, and she let me choose it. No one believes me, but I remember doing it, and my mom often talked about it. Story 4. When I was 7, my parents were housing some young filmmakers, and they had Steve Buscemi over for dinner. He was really a nice guy, just as everyone says. Story 5. I have a recurring dream world I visit every time I sleep, even during naps. I know where the coffee shop is, I have a cat, and I know the locations of the restaurants. Recently, I had trouble sleeping and couldn't rest for 3 nights. When I finally fell asleep, I found myself right back in my dream world, and I said, I really miss this place. In my dream. Story 6. I once guessed the answer correctly on Wheel of Fortune with no letters on the board. There were no witnesses, though. Story 7. I failed physics in my last semester of high school, and my school refused to graduate me. However, I had already been accepted to college on an academic scholarship, and they didn't care, so I moved on with my life. Later, I received a full scholarship to law school. Now, I hold a Bachelor of Arts and a Juris Doctor, both from top 10 programs. However, I still do not have a high school diploma, and I still do not know physics. Story 8. I have a mostly invisible and thankfully mild form of cerebral palsy called flaccid hemiparesis. The right side of my body is significantly weaker than my left. Thanks to early intervention with physical therapy, I learned to walk and run with mostly no problems. Other fine and gross motor skills, such as swimming, athletics, and throwing a ball, are extremely difficult for me. To most people who aren't familiar or do not examine me closely, my disability is almost completely invisible. It is challenging to go through life with an invisible disability. My range of motion is extremely limited, but no one takes it seriously. It feels dishonest to claim a disability and deprive those who truly need more resources when accessibility services are already inadequate and the needs of disabled individuals in the United States are often ignored. I can start activities but will never be able to perform them well. I cannot swim properly because I struggle to coordinate motion between my right and left sides. My girlfriend, a swim instructor, has been patient in trying to teach me, but she can see that I struggle to move in the water. I play soccer, but people get frustrated when I cannot use my right side at all. Playing musical instruments is also extremely difficult because I cannot move individual fingers on my right hand. I do not know why I am even writing this. I just need to vent because it feels lonely. I am not impaired in my daily life in any substantial way. I just cannot excel in physical activities, and my range of motion is very limited. Unfortunately, my experience often goes unrecognized when I try to express it. Story 9. For 8 years, I earned over $500,000 a year. The last year was 2015 when I developed a drug problem. I left the money behind, and now I live okay. But I seriously wish I could have controlled myself and still be making that kind of money. Story 10. I once avoided getting struck by lightning while walking back from fishing alone in the high Uinta Mountains. A thunderstorm was moving in, and my fishing rod started shocking me while I was crossing the earthen dam at the reservoir, a very exposed location. I threw it to the ground and scrambled down the side of the dam as fast as possible. I pressed myself to the ground for about a minute. Once my hair stopped standing on end, I grabbed the rod and sprinted back to my campsite. It's been almost 2 decades, and I still avoid being outside in exposed areas during storms. Story 11. I helped save a man's life during a particularly difficult experience. I experienced severe stomach issues, which distracted me from my discomfort. As a result, we delayed our estimated time of arrival by 30 minutes, which upset my family. On the way back, a driver behind us was behaving erratically. He confronted us on an off-ramp, and we were able to call for an ambulance. He was a diabetic and was unable to focus on the road, so he followed us until we stopped. If we hadn't been there at that moment, he might not have made it. Story 12. I was born deaf and remained that way until I was 5 years old when I was hit by a car and hit my head on a gas pump. When I woke up, I could hear. Story 13. When I was in primary school during recess, I was not paying attention when a soccer ball came flying and hit me directly in the ear. It struck so hard that it damaged my ear cartilage. As a result, I now have an elf ear. I've told many people about this, but for some reason, they don't believe me. Story 14. When my twin and I were younger, we would both have a nosebleed at the same time. We could be in different locations doing different things, but if one of us caused a nosebleed, the other would also get one. Story 15. I really enjoy smelling flowers. I always have to get a whiff of some roses and tulips when I'm at the grocery store. When I lived alone, I would buy myself flowers because they look and smell nice. It's unexpected because I'm a big bearded man who never talks about flowers and acts like I have no idea what baby's breath or begonias are. Story 16. A man at the church where my father was the pastor tried to get too familiar with me in a basement Sunday school classroom when I was 7 years old. Story 17. My grandfather is on a $2 bill. He taught people how to survive on land during the Arctic relocation. Those 4 men are referred to as human flagpoles. Story 18. I have played lead guitar in bands for over 20 years, both casually and seriously. I work in a corporate role, and when I mention my musical background, my colleagues often ask questions as if they are trying to catch me in a lie. Story 19. I often see colors when I hear sounds. Usually, I perceive blues if it is a sudden, unexpected sound and reds when it is a deep sound. Story 20. I have attention deficit disorder, and my mother thought I was a willful and obstinate child who didn't need special tutors, but rather a good spanking once in a while to set me straight. However, she reluctantly agreed to a reading tutor because she felt that as an 8-year-old in 3rd grade, I should be able to read a children's book already. So, she allowed the parochial school to put me in a special 1-hour tutoring program during English class. There were 8 students in the tutoring program for an hour, but another student and I received extra time with the teacher, making it definitely more than an hour. It was not until I was in my 50s that my mother told me, I was talking to your cousin about you and all the difficulties you had in school, and she said the oddest thing to me. She said it sounded like you have attention deficit disorder, and she is amazed you got as far as you did in school without help. I told her you don't have any of that nonsense, but she began to list things that described you perfectly, as if she lived at our house. So now I believe you really do have attention deficit disorder, and I want to know, how did you get through college with it? Years of special tutoring and counseling, mother. Just to clarify, I loved my mother, and to say my relationship with her was complicated would be an understatement. Story 21. I'm an introvert. I am friendly, outgoing, and sincere, but I am not very social. I need my alone time and a lot of it. There is a common misconception that introversion equals shyness and vice versa. Story 22. I am often quiet in most situations, so people are surprised to discover that I am competitive, a little extroverted, and have done some adventurous things in my 20s. They tend to assume that someone quiet is boring. Story 23. I have been homeless, living on the street and in a car. Now, I am a dentist. Statistically, I was not supposed to succeed, but hard times create strong individuals. I credit my mother, may she rest in peace, for being both my mom and my dad. Story 24. I was walking through the countryside when I saw a large sheep near a cattle grid. It looked me in the eye, then rolled over the grid to the other side. It got up again and looked at me as if to say, no one will believe you. And that's exactly the case. I don't trust sheep now. They seem suspicious. Story 25. My daughters, now in their 40s, think I'm lying when I tell them they loved lima beans as toddlers and would eat them eagerly. Others agree with them. Story 26. I met Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez while they were still dating backstage at one of her concerts because I was friends with the opening act. I went back to talk to her, which was a very cool experience, and they walked up to us and started chatting. They were both very nice, and it was a great moment as they were at the height of their fame at the time. However, for some reason, people think I'm making it up even though I have pictures of myself with my friend from that night. Story 27. I'm unbreakable, I think. I have never been sick from major or minor issues. No colds, flu, stomach bugs, or hospital visits. You name it. I have no idea what heartburn is. I'm in my 50s, and so far, there is not one trace of baldness or thinning hair. My resting heart rate is just above 50. I got hit by a car when I was a kid. The car then ran over my foot. The woman driving freaked out and backed over my foot. There were no broken bones. I slipped on wet steps, maybe a set of 10 or so. Yes, I was running. I went flying and got some cool bruises. I have never been hurt playing sports. I was in a mosh pit in the 1990s and smashed heads with someone. He got knocked out, and I said, ouch. While mountain biking, I was at the bottom of a very steep hill. After useless braking on a wet trail, I flew over my handlebars and hit a tree. I broke the tree, which was long dead, and then dusted myself off. My wife had COVID-19 3 times, but I never got it. During that time, I had a second job working the night shift at a warehouse where people were getting COVID-19 all around me. I never contracted it and got tested more than I could count. I have numerous incidents like these, but I really can't remember the last time I was sick. I do have a weakness, chocolate. It's serious. Keep it away from me. I did grab a pan handle from a pan that had been in a 400-degree oven for an hour and burned my hand. I put some cream on it and bandaged it, and I was all good after a while. Years ago, I touched a live wire in an office building and got quite the shock. I blew half my fingernail off, but that was it. The surprise was worse than the actual electrical shock. Now this is turning into a Final Destination scenario. Story 28. I have had 23 surgeries and will have 24 in the fall, in addition to many challenges I have faced. I also survived a cancer diagnosis with a 1 in 1,075,000 chance last year, all at the age of 16 or earlier. I believe that is enough said. Story 29. I've had dreams about events that happen later. I think it's déjà vu. I have no idea how that works. Recently, I dreamed that I was walking in a mall near my house and bumped into a bald man wearing a leather jacket. About 3 weeks later, a friend and I were at that mall, and that same person bumped into me at the exact spot. It's a bit unsettling. Story 30. I was involved in a sporting accident and broke my nose. After the bruising and swelling went down, it became clear that the break had significantly improved the appearance of my nose. Everyone, including my family, thinks I had a nose job and that I invented the accident as a cover story. Story 31. I could read the Washington Post when I was under 2 years old. I was what is called a spontaneous reader. My family often wondered why I would pick up the newspaper and stare at it as a tiny child. That is, until I asked my mom what the word gubernatorial meant because I couldn't read it. She asked me why I was asking about that particular word, and I told her that all the other words spoke to me, but that one didn't. So, she asked me to read her the rest of the paragraph. I did. I thought everybody could read from the time they were able to pick up a book or newspaper. It actually made raising my son difficult because I didn't know how to teach him to read. I remember reading about the assassination of John F. Kennedy in the Washington Post, and I was under 2 when it happened. For some reason, my desire to read was spurred by wanting to know more about Jacqueline Kennedy because I'm a fashion enthusiast, and she seems so glamorous to me. Reading about her is among my earliest memories of reading. Story 32. I am a Guinness World Record holder for the most costumed people on a roller coaster. We were dressed as zombies, and it took place at Dorney Park. Story 33. I got slimed at Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, but it wasn't on television because it was the week they were filming in the Bahamas. Story 34. A student teacher at my grade school sexually abused me from ages 7 to 10, and nobody believed me when I tried to speak out. I tried to tell my therapist when I was 11, but she convinced my parents I was lying because the student teacher in question was one of her relatives. I acknowledge that I am an alcoholic. People often say, "You look too put together." It's been 11 years, and I am only now beginning to piece my life back together. Story 35. Not about me, but when she was in her early 20s, my mom lived in the United States. She worked as a waitress for private parties, mostly for wealthy individuals. At one point, she was invited to a garden party. Feeling bored, she decided to join the lonely guy grilling sausages on the barbecue. They chatted and laughed, and then served the sausages. The other guests were in awe and approached my mom to ask if she knew who she was cooking with. My mom responded, "Yes, it's George, a nice guy." It was, in fact, George Lucas. My mom grilled sausages with George Lucas. Story 36. I have a photographic memory. I can remember details from books, conversations, and even specific dates without taking notes. Story 37. I have two uncles on both sides of my family who share the same name in the same order of birth. One uncle on each side is married to a woman with the same name. Story 38. I was in the emergency exit row of a plane when it landed on the runway, and the pilot called to evacuate. I pulled the door into the cabin, threw it out onto the wing, and jumped off the wing, followed by everyone else. Story 39. My brother and I have no problem believing that the house we grew up in for nearly 20 years was haunted by a malevolent spirit. For several years, it seemed to want our attention, as all the strange and unexplainable events only happened to us, not our parents. Whenever we tried to tell them about the bizarre occurrences, they didn't believe us and would tell us to stop making things up. Both of our parents are gone now, but we still discuss how creepy and uneasy we felt in that house whenever they were away. Neither of us ever wanted to leave the other alone in the house. It was strange how if something wild happened to one of us, something equally bizarre would occur to the other days later. After nearly 10 years of these happenings, our mother started to believe us. Eventually, when we were in our late teens, she had someone come and bless every corner of the house because strange events started happening to her, too, although nothing ever happened to our father. He found it just as bizarre as we did that none of the strange events affected him. The more unsettling part? Our father was relatively healthy with only mild health concerns, but when he was 54 years old, he died unexpectedly in that house from a massive heart attack. My mother said he was walking around, talking incoherently, and not making any sense. He kept saying he was too hot and then too cold, complaining that every bone in his body hurt. When he fell asleep next to her with a cold pack on his chest, he said he felt too hot. She woke up later, went to check on him, and found he was cold. He had died 4 hours before she woke up. She had awakened at 3 in the morning, thinking she heard her mother's voice nagging her to check on our father, even though her mother had been dead for several years. When she woke up, she scared herself by saying, "Okay, Mom, I'm going." To this day, childhood friends who stayed overnight at our house don't believe us because whenever they were there, nothing happened. Story 40. This thread is amazing. Thank you for the entertainment. My life isn't nearly as interesting as all of yours. Story 41. I had a neighbor, Tom, who used to talk about everything in an exaggerated way. It was exhausting. He shared all kinds of questionable stories about celebrity encounters. One day, I met his brother, Jim. We hit it off, and I eventually said, "Your brother, Tom, is quite the character." Jim replied, "Oh yeah, Tom is full of nonsense all the time." We talked about his greatest hits, his favorite tall tales about hanging out with various celebrities. I mentioned, he likes to talk about how he knew Madonna before she was famous. Jim responded, "Actually, that one is true. She lived in his building in New York City. I met her too. They used to hang out on the stoop sometimes, and she would talk about taking over the world. She was really focused on rehearsing and getting famous." Story 42. I am a truck driver in Tennessee who creates abstract contemporary fine art paintings and sells them online. Most of my customers are in New York City or California. Story 43. I'm a bit over 8 feet tall. The only ones who don't believe this are those who haven't met me in person. Story 44. I have full control of my body. I can achieve full erection in less than 5 seconds, maintain an erection after orgasm, and do not experience the ticklish feeling that others mention, allowing me to continue through and beyond orgasm. I truly have full control. Story 45. I was on an escalator when it collapsed 2 steps away from where an elderly lady and I were standing. I carried her away as the whole collapsed toward us, near where we had been. If we hadn't escaped, we would have fallen into the gears or dropped 3 stories, which is a terrible design flaw for the mall. No one believes me, so I don't get any recognition for being a hero. Story 46. My parents became undercover police informants and received an award from the city in a secret ceremony for bringing down a gang and lowering crime rates. They did this in 2 different cities in the country. I rarely share this story because it sounds unbelievable, but it is completely true. The events are reminiscent of something from a Netflix series. Story 47. Starting at 17, I began working at a 24-hour fitness center. I became the general manager of my own club by 19. By my 21st birthday, I started working as a director, earning $150,000 with a company car and my high school diploma. I saved money to pursue an education, and now I earn $90,000 per year, which is much more stable. Story 48. I saved a stallion who was choking on an apple by inserting my entire arm down his throat. Story 49. I am athletic and was a professional athlete for 6 years, specifically in track. I am under 6 feet tall, very thin, in my late 30s, balding, have poor eyesight, and enjoy anime and Dungeons and Dragons. I dress in a casual style, which leads everyone to assume I don't participate in sports or that I am not athletic. However, I can run a 4.40-second 40-yard dash, complete a mile in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, bench press just under 300 pounds, about double my body weight, and squat well over 300 pounds. I am also very agile. I can perform standing backflips and dive rolls. My athletic abilities have earned me Division I college offers, and I have run professionally. Although my body may not fit the traditional image of an athlete, I simply carry my muscle differently. Story 50. I am ambidextrous in the sense that I am right-handed in certain activities and left-handed in others. I write with my left hand but throw with my right. I kick with my left foot and punch with my right. The list continues. Story 51. I have a phonographic memory. I remember every bit of every song I've ever heard. I can sing melodies from songs I heard once, years ago. I don't always remember the lyrics, but I recognize all the musical parts decades later, even if I heard them as background music in a store. Story 52. When I was about 11, my friends and I were sitting outside my grandmother's house, chatting, when a fireball suddenly appeared. No more than 100 feet off the ground, it slowly and gracefully passed over us. We were sure it was going to crash into the housing complex, so we chased after it. The fireball continued over the houses until we lost sight of it. This was in Middlesbrough in the early 1970s. Story 53. I predicted my grandma's passing as a child. She was in a hospice for advanced cancer in her digestive tract. The night before she died, I had a dream about my grandpa in a suit waiting for her in a field of flowers. She was running to him even though she had multiple sclerosis and could no longer walk. He looked so happy that she was finally with him. I told my parents because I felt differently about this dream. It was a strange feeling, as if something was about to happen. Not long after, we received the call that she had passed in the hospice. Story 54. I caught a shiny Pokemon with Pokerus, which is a 1 in 178 million chance. It was also my first shiny after playing Pokemon for over 10 years. Story 55. When I was 9, a man tried to kidnap me, but I squirmed enough and got away. Nobody believes me because they didn't see it, but no adults were supervising me. Story 56. I had a dream that my boyfriend was killed about a week before he got into a fatal accident at work. The day it happened, I asked him to call off because I had a bad feeling. I don't think there is anything I could have done to keep him from going in, but I still wonder. Story 57. When I was 19, I witnessed a flying object in the middle of the morning. I rarely share this experience, but when I do, people stare at me in disbelief. Story 58. My mom's friend used to be friends with Cassandra Peterson. I had an Elvira obsession when I was younger, so when my mom showed me a picture of the two together, I felt incredibly jealous. Story 59. Growing up, I lived 3 blocks away from a quiet golf course in my town. Hardly anyone used the back nine during the week, especially in the afternoon, so I would go over after school and hit some golf balls around. I somehow managed to achieve a hole-in-one on a par 3. I stood there for several minutes, wondering what just happened and feeling sheer disappointment that nobody saw it. It was an out-of-body experience. Every time I am back home and at the golf club for some reason, I sadly look at the big plaque on the wall with the names of the few people who have officially made a hole-in-one, but I cannot say anything. Story 60. I once jumped a train track right in front of a train. I was 19, and my car was full of people screaming about how the rent was late and that we were going to get kicked out. I had been homeless before this, and it really overwhelmed me. I freaked out, drove around the stalled traffic, maneuvered around the barriers, and jumped the tracks. I looked over and saw the train 10 feet from the car as we sailed over the tracks. The rent was delivered on time. I would not do that again. It was definitely my most reckless and stupid near-death experience. Story 61. I am feeling depressed, anxious, and introverted. I seem to appear as a social and happy person in social settings. Story 62. I was born in a hay bale house with dirt floors covered in newspapers. That is what I learned to walk on. Story 63. I have one of the rarest medical conditions, but it has only hindered me in emotional and relational ways. It has not caused a significant lowering of my IQ to the extent that I need government assistance or in-home health care. According to research released after I was diagnosed and treated with brain surgery, it is expected that a person would experience personality changes, depression, and difficulties with relationships. However, functionally, cognitive ability may decline, and the capacity to drive or perform a typical minimum wage job could diminish. I have been a teacher for 14 years, hold a master's degree, and live independently. While I may not be doing as well as some, I am also not struggling as much as others. I do not have friends or a significant other, but I believe my particular condition plays a larger role in that than doctors tend to assume. Story 64. I am one of 26 children from my father. Story 65. The midwife who delivered me was bitten by a snake in the parking lot of the hospital the day I was born. Story 66. I once went surfing for the first time in 30 years with a friend. Between big waves, I saw a little hand sticking up out of the water. I grabbed it and pulled up a girl between 5 and 7 years old. I swam her in, and she ran off. Story 67. I swear I saw a 10-foot-tall stick figure in my backyard when I was 13. It could have just been my mind playing tricks, but it glided around a privacy fence, made no sound, and barely moved its legs. I screamed and ran inside. Story 68. I had a stroke in July 2017, and one of the effects was that I lost the ability to see color. I could only see in grayscale. Then, in December 2017, I had another stroke which caused me to be in a coma for 6 days. When I woke up, I was able to see in color again. Story 69. I can play every musical instrument. You could invent a new musical instrument, show me how to produce sound with it, and explain the general idea of how the notes change. I could play it at a surprisingly high level within an hour or so. I have often performed on stage with professional level bands and played entire shows without charts, notes, or even knowing the key of the songs. Just a nod if they want a solo. I can sense pitch, perceive harmonic direction, and intuitively predict how a song will progress. While extremely technical elements such as switching time signatures with unusual breaks can still be challenging, it's rare for anyone watching the show to think I am out of place. I have a unique ability that allows me to excel in this area. Story 70. When family members pass away, I often have an unsettling feeling before it happens. Started when I was young. My great-grandmother passed away when I was around 6 or 7 during my little league game. As my father and I walked back to the car, I turned to him and asked if she was dead. At the time, he couldn't check because he didn't have a cell phone. He looked at me strangely and said, "No." When we got home, my mother informed him, and he literally went pale. The second time was when my grandfather's brother passed away. I was at my grandfather's house, pestering him to take me to McDonald's. He finally agreed, and as we sat in the drive-thru, I felt a wave of anxiety. I noticed it was 7:43 p.m., When we got home, we walked in to find my aunt sitting on the couch, and she told my grandfather that his brother had passed away at 7:30. My grandfather, being old school, always kept every clock ahead by about 10 minutes. This has happened many times since then. I am much older now, and it still unsettles me. Story 71. I met the first female Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, at Trinity University after she gave a lecture. 3 years later, the Taliban assassinated her, which was very tragic. Story 72. That I actually have the conditions I do: histamine intolerance, pudendal neuralgia, food allergies, and inhalant allergies. Despite telling people repeatedly, I am still offered foods I cannot eat. I often forget about glucose intolerance, even though it is one of the most bothersome conditions. For example, at a party with older adults, I mentioned I cannot have sugar. Yet at another gathering, I was asked if I would like some cake. It should not be difficult to remember. Story 73. People assume that I am from a very well-off background because of the way I speak, which is admittedly somewhat posh. When I try to explain that I am actually from a difficult housing estate, quite a few people don't believe me. Story 74. I was born in Mexico. I am Mexican, and my whole family is Mexican. I speak Spanish. The only reason some people question my nationality is because I have light skin and freckles. That doesn't mean I'm not Mexican. Story 75. Nobody would believe it, but I have most likely engineered your experience on an airplane or in a hotel in the United States in the last 5 years. Story 76. Once I was on a break from work, grabbing lunch from a Taco Bell across the street with a coworker. I decided to go next door to get a pretzel and a drink from Wawa while my coworker placed her order at Taco Bell. While I was between the two locations, which only had a small grass patch between them, I checked a voicemail on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman screaming for help, genuinely distressed, not a fake actor's scream. I listened to the whole thing, confused, and decided to replay it to confirm what I had heard so I could figure out what to do. When I listened to it again, it was just a normal, innocent voicemail. I don't think I have told anyone this story, but it absolutely happened. It was around March or April of 2018, right outside one of the back employee entrances to SeaWorld Orlando, where I worked at the time. I never really believed in the paranormal before then, but I am much more open-minded nowadays, even if I am still a bit of a skeptic. I'm pretty sure I will never find out what happened. Story 77. I recently had a psychic reading that was so accurate it really disturbed me and made me cry. The only information she had about me was my first name. I didn't pay, and she didn't approach me first. There's no way she could have known what she did. I grew up with the internet, and I know how to recognize when something is fake. Completely unsettled me. She told me some things that may happen in the future, and if they do, I will be truly astonished. This experience has changed my perspective on spirituality. Story 78. Not to bring the mood down, but I became pregnant from rape twice and kept both children. The first time I was 14. The second time I was 29. I couldn't believe it happened a second time. They are good kids, and I love them. They are smart, good-looking, athletic, and just wonderful kids. Story 79. I have sleep paralysis, and I can feel and see everything that happens to me in my sleep. I can even experience orgasm if I focus. It's a wild phenomenon. Story 80. I love being outside. Nobody believes it because I am usually indoors, but it is due to my very low heat tolerance and living in an area that is sweltering for most of the year. I have very fair skin, and any meaningful sun exposure results in a painful sunburn. Melanoma runs strongly in my father's family, so I am trying to avoid that as well. I sometimes forget to reapply sunscreen, and even when I do it consistently, I still find myself burning. As a result, I often hide indoors from both the heat and the ultraviolet radiation. However, whenever I am in more pleasant places, like New England or Alaska, I enjoy being outside, hiking, fishing, boating, or simply admiring the beauty. Everyone is always surprised. Story 81. I once met a family with all 4 names identical to ours in a different state. The reason I initiated the conversation was that I heard them call one of their kids by the uncommon name our child has. Then they mentioned their other child's name, and I was astonished. continued from there. They looked as if we were playing a prank on them, but it was truly that strange. Story 82. People have attempted to kidnap me twice, and there was one attempted hijacking. One time, my car was hijacked. I have also randomly witnessed 3 different crimes purely by accident and had to testify in court for 2 of them. I live in a really safe area, though, so people don't believe me. Story 83. When I was a kid, I was walking home with my friend from school. We were about 9 or 10 years old. We went to the park before heading home, and I noticed a white car pulling up. It had 2 males inside, both wearing black sunglasses. I found this strange, so I told my friend we should walk home, and we did. I noticed the car following us, so I told her to run. We ran home and informed my mother. A couple of days earlier, I remembered waiting at a corner to cross the street. The same white car with the same males had stopped next to me, looked at me, and then drove off. I believe this was an attempt at kidnapping. It gives me chills. Story 84. I won a beautiful baby contest when I was a newborn. I don't know why, because I think I look quite different now. Story 85. Nothing special. No one except my brother, who lived with me and saw it, believes I ballooned to 100 kilograms at 176 centimeters and dropped down to 65 kilograms in a year just by changing my diet, mostly cutting out sugar and going for a 20-minute daily walk. Story 86. I insulted Harlan Ellison and lived to tell the tale. He was a guest at Worldcon in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1978 or 1979. As he descended the hotel escalator I was ascending, my friend said, "Oh look, there's Harlan." I responded, "Harlan who?" and wondered why the short man with glasses was glowering at me. Story 87. I can sight read pretty much any piano manuscript put in front of me. Can I play it to perfection? No, I can play it okay, but I can see what it sounds like. Oddly, I can't play by ear at all. Story 88. I was very drunk one night sitting on a bench when a van pulled in beside me. The driver said he knew me well and offered to take me home. Being from Ireland, it didn't seem out of the realm of possibility. However, this guy started driving the wrong way to my home and asked me to open his glove box. Inside, I found a load of adult magazines, and he asked if it was gay if he asked for a sexual favor. I told him to let me out of the car immediately, and he insisted that he did it all the time and that it wasn't gay. I jumped out, and he turned the car so the headlights were on me. I went to his window and threatened to beat him up if he didn't leave. He drove off, and I had to walk back to the nearest town. On the way, I ran into a friend of mine, but since then, no one believes me about the predator driving around. Story 89. I only have one kidney, and nobody is sure why. I had a severe kidney infection when I was a baby, and they did a scan to check the other one, only to find it was absent. My medical records from when I was born were all normal, but they apparently missed that I was missing a kidney since there were no issues to suggest it. It's never caused me any health problems aside from needing to drink more water than usual, so I just cope with it. Story 90. I don't hate everyone. I just prefer to be a loner. I don't need social interaction. Just give me a house in the middle of nowhere and some things to keep me entertained. If I ever win the lottery, my dream will come true. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.